Ready.
Okay, so this particular session is knowledge of customer experience design, execution, and innovation. I thought it was going to be a total breeze to do because we do a lot of that in our practice. And I was pretty shocked to see what the CXPA blueprint was for doing this. So it has a really valuable set of information. It's a real interesting approach, and it takes a very design thinking approach, very IDEO-like, if you know the company in California that has done some magnificent product design. But it leaves out a whole lot of things that I would think that a CX professional would need to be able to do to tie back what they do into the company and help others execute on CX. So I'm going to offer up at a later time, I'll call it a methodology that I know a lot of people utilize that augments this. So if anybody's interested in doing that, I'll either just do it in hard copy and share it, or do a session just not focused on the study group, but more of a general learning session if anyone's interested on some of that. Because I realized when I went through this that the focus was a little bit different than an actionable tactical one from a CX perspective. It covers in incredible depth more of the UX and architecture side. That make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm now going to go into screen mode. So as customer experience professionals, experience design and improvement is a core competency. So the exam blueprint says that we must establish and follow a well-defined design process each time an experience is created, and just as importantly, changed, as well as using iterative ideation and prototyping to engage customers and employees in the co-creation of enhanced or innovative experiences. So when going through the 100 questions in this particular piece, they were divided up into these following groups, right? General experience design and brand alignment, design thinking, design tools, customer insight, which incorporates personas, I added segments, customer journeys, service design and blueprinting, and testing and prototyping. So we're going to first cover general experience design. So in the past, products and services were designed by trial and error. And I'm sure you've all seen this picture. It's pretty common, right? This is what you've designed and this is what users are actually doing. So that is pretty typical. But today, experience design is become far more scientific. There's design thinking, customer co-creation approaches, process improvement methodologies and disciplines, Six Sigma being a primary one, Lean Sigma, Safe Sigma, all of those approaches. Customer journey mapping, touchpoint analysis, the ability to identify key moments of truth that affect customer perceptions, the ability to conduct experience gap analysis and prioritize them so that you can get to recommended improvements, the ability to drive customer-centered design and innovation, being able to accurately map and depict customer touch points, and then to drive action and execution of those improvements. So experience design tasks include establishing and following a well-defined design process each time an experience is created or changed. Use of customer insights to define and prioritize experience requirements and opportunities for improvement. Journey mapping to improve most relevant moments of truth, which is interesting. We'll get into this a little more because our view of using different visualization tools is larger than the scope of what the CXPA has presented. Assessing, documenting, tracking, and reporting resolution of experience gaps. This is a real critical thing. The documentation of what's going on is really important. And when we listen to different people and we do, I go to the Insight Exchange and hear questions, a lot of times people forget that documenting, tracking, and metrics piece, which again makes it really difficult for them to tie back the improvements from current to future state. Identifying interdependencies across people, process, and technology. I often add culture in this. Bain uses operations, information technology, OPIT as their term, but culture is becoming more and more important as well. And then using iterative ideation and prototyping to engage customers and employees in co-creating enhanced or innovative experiences. Any questions? It's a big mouthful, but when you go back to this and we start going through the questions, take a really good look at these two slides, because what you will find is many of the questions directly relate to that. Now, I've also given you a little clue when you take time to review this again after the fact, is I've bolded some of the things that are in some of the 100 questions. They may not be in our question set today, but they're definitely in this CX University questions, and Mark, you can probably chime in as well to see if they're in any of the other of the training professionals that do this for a living's questions. So design thinking is a methodology used to solve complex problems and find desirable solutions for clients. It's very structured. It's brainstorming primarily, draws on logic, imagination, intuition, and systemic reasoning, right and left brain, to explore possibilities of what could be, and then to create the requirements for desired outcomes that focus on the end user, meaning the customer. And that could be EX or CX, or EX meets CX. It's a deeply human-centered approach of using intuition to best develop ideas that are emotionally meaningful and connected. There's an entire line of ideation and information around human-centered design. Very, very interesting if any of you are psych majors like I was. And it also is really interesting because in fact, there were a couple of speakers at Insight Exchange and NextScan. There's a woman who does a fabulous TED Talk. She's a stroke survivor, and she actually documented her stroke and then her recovery. And what she found, because her stroke was in her, what we lovingly call our little alligator brain or amalgamum, is that feeling and being comfortable is the #1 thing that you have to address. If you're not feeling safe, comfortable, and secure, there is no upper cortex stuff going on at all. So one of her quotes that we often use is, "We are really feeling creatures who can think, not the other way around." And that's really hard for a lot of us quants to address, right? Because you're quantitative, you hear data, data, data. Well, facts and data don't necessarily matter if you're not feeling safe, secure, and ready to hear them, which is something that impacts everybody in design. A design culture encourages failure because failure is considered a part of the cost of innovation. So you hear all those Steve Jobs quotes and a lot of those. It's not necessarily required to fail, but having failure not be negative in your culture, so you try more things, is really important. It involves multiple steps. Now, in the test, you are going to find that probably 8% of the test has these little strings of what are the steps and what order should they be in. So in this case, design thinking has first research, then ideation, prototyping, choosing what you want to do, implementing, and then learning. There's also the act, do cycle that a lot of people do: plan, act, do, measure, repeat. And design thinking leads to better solutions and greater creativity. Any questions? Okay, hopefully you guys are all awake at 9 o'clock. So innovation is an output of design thinking. It's one of the things that it particularly does well. So as you turn your focus on your customers into innovation, this little path here is kind of interesting. So if you're doing outcome-based customer interviews versus kind of squishy ones, that's a technical term, capturing what the desired outcomes are, that's needs and requirements from their viewpoint, organizing them, prioritizing them, and then using them to jumpstart innovation, that's the fastest way to skip steps A, B, C, D, and then jump right up to Z. What's the difference between CX and UX? This is an ongoing discussion, and we hear it a lot. I presented it a number of times, and if you guys are interested in the little white papers that I have done, I admit that I'm biased to the fact that I think CX is the umbrella on which UX and architectural design and testing and all of those other more technical elements sit under. Because user design tends to involve a product being used. Now, it could be a service as well, but it tends to be products, like designing your phone or designing a particular experience that you want with an app, so to speak. And the experience surrounding that is limited to that individual product. So you have a product manager that's doing UX design with Jira or some of the other tools. And it could be an in-person experience. It could be a mobile app, a website, or a physical object. While CX design looks at the entire experience, it requires business skills, right? So what you're looking at is the entire life cycle of your target customer or the entire brand experience. And a customer is any person getting in contact with the brand, whether or not they may at some point use that product provided by the brand, right? The customer touch points with brands are various, and a customer may become a user of several different products or services at some point across her journey. We often find that when people do experience or journey maps or touch point design, that they forget several touch points. The first one is the one that doesn't necessarily touch the brand, but is about it, which would be customer to customer, things like social media comments and things like that. There's also planned and unplanned touches. So an unplanned touch is one that the company hasn't thought about and isn't prepared for. And it happens, and invariably, it's not a good experience because they had no idea, unless they had particularly empowered employees that knew what they were doing and could deal with an unplanned touch. Oftentimes, companies, it's a blind spot, which is where, again, complaints come in, because oftentimes complaints come in because a company isn't prepared for that. So understanding the full range of inbound, outbound, interactive, planned and unplanned touches is really important. So UX is part of CX, right? As each product needs to be user-friendly. So this is a subject, again, a big debate, because UX people who are you know, again, sometimes this is a silo problem as well. They tend to be in different organizations, think they know everything about the customer and they're ready to go. So using experience maps and techniques of analyzing your touch points can really help the UX folks, who tend to have their gaps as being gaps between timing, cadence, and relevance, right? So the customer is going down their journey, and it could be their life or a segment of their life or a particular element. And unless the UX person actually knows where the right moment in time is, just like a moment of truth, to insert that information, oftentimes they miss that. Questions? Comments? You're all quiet.
This is Marianne. Just a comment about UX and CX. I think you're right on, Valerie. In my experience, I come from the federal government, but have been out for a few years now. And the federal government is really getting on board with user experience and building that into their capabilities and the products and services that they design. But by and large, I see that people think of customer experience as user experience. And they're not there yet in the maturity of thinking about the broader realm of customer experience as a whole business discipline. UX is a part of the business discipline of CX.
Yep, exactly. And there's a comment here. My company has struggled with this more with digital, meaning explaining the difference between digital experience and digital CX. Exactly. Now, that the whole science of, or the whole process of digital transformation, and there really are two different digital transformations. One is moving to digital tools and mobile tools, and the other one in digital transformation that a lot of people forget about is the access to information like a database and big data, and giving leadership the data they need to be able to operate their business. So there's kind of two places there. But if in the digital transformation of people who use more digital tools, i.e. websites, mobile apps, etc., a lot of people, well, first of all, they make the assumption that, again, remember the feeling, people who can think, we may use digital and have a digital experience, but there are people tend to be far more omni-channel than one expects. And it's not even across the Molly Millennial versus Samantha Senior. So what you hear a lot, Mary, and I'm sure Marianne, you hear this is what we want our customers to do. We want to save money by driving them to the web. Right? What
That's
we
right.
want them to make their experiences effortless on the channel that they choose.
That's
And
right.
if we make it really good and they tend towards digital, then they use that as their primary channel, right? It's a big difference there,
Yes.
right?
Agree.
Yep. Okay, there's a whole set of subjects on that, so I'm happy to share on that because it's really interesting to me, if you hadn't noticed. Okay, now, design tools and techniques. I had never heard of the term body storming before. How many of you have ever heard that term? Thought it was interesting. The definition of experience design is the conceptualization, development, and orchestration of all interactions between a customer and a brand, right? Pretty big. The sequence is first research, analysis, ideation, prototyping, and documentation. Design tools include quick and dirty prototyping, role-playing, brainstorming, body storming, character profiles, and we would call them personas in most of the common language that I hear, or segments, fly-on-the-wall observation, extreme user interviews, sort of like a sport, I think, and drawing the experience, which we generally refer to as some kind of experience or journey mapping. But this exact terminology is, if you think of it, it's a kind of a term of art.
Valerie, can you tell us? Oh, there it is, body storming.
Yeah, we'll get there. Now, you notice how much is bolded here. 30% of the 100 questions that were in CX Universtiy, which is no guarantee that they're in the test, but again, it was heavily weighted towards these particular definitions, right? And because, to me, this is where I failed a lot of questions in the test, a lot of them subtly are similar, right? Like quick and dirty prototyping communicates a concept to the team of how to evaluate, refine, and work the design. Role-playing identifies stakeholders involved in the design problem by assigning roles to be played out by members of the team, as compared, and I'll come back to it, to body storming, which sets up a scenario and acts out roles with or without props, focusing on the intuitive responses prompted by the physical enactment, and enables you to generate and test out many context and behavior-based concepts. So that sounds to me more like a focus group where you're giving people access to the product and you're doing multiple things. You might be doing quick and dirty prototyping, role-playing, and shadowing, which is a way to reveal design opportunities and show how a product might affect or complement users' behavior. So using a tool like Jira or user test is a good view of shadowing, right? Because you're kind of a thing. But then as we get into the next set of questions, I'm not sure how much different that is as fly on the wall. So brainstorming is after synthesizing all the data points, surveys, and other methods, it's examined thoroughly through the technique of, again, formal brainstorming or scrumming is a pretty typical technique. And then as we move down here, character profiling is based on the observations of real people. Character profiles present personas and archetypes and the details of their behavior or life cycle. So I'll pause and put my 2 cents in here, where most of the work I see is either segmentation, and we'll go into that in a minute. It's a statistical and very accurate way of looking at your customers. Personas, which is the softening and storytelling of that segment. And then archetypes are a very special thing in our practice. It's more like the Martha Stewart or the, is a great example of it, or the Oprah archetype, where regardless of your particular either segment or age group, there are certain key attributes that a person follows that make them a interested party in that particular individual or archetype over their entire life. So those 3 things are very separate to me, and how you utilize them in executing CX is very different, right? So drawing the experience, again, visualizing is a good way to debunk assumptions and reveal how people conceive of and order their experiences or activities. I think that's a very narrow description. But then, again, I don't know that it has been updated in the last probably 10 years either. Fly on the wall observation observes and records user behavior without interfering with their activities. Extreme user interviews, the new sport. Anybody want to jump in? Enables users to highlight key issues of the design problem and provide insights for design improvements. Narration is used to perform a process or execute a specific task and ask participants to describe aloud what they're thinking. Now, I see narration and user testing and fly on the wall often are combined. So if you were doing a user test or a JIRA file and you were observing and shadowing them, you could also have narration to ask people to speak out loud what they're saying, thinking, and doing as they go through the process. So I think some of these definitely can and should be combined. Any comments before we move on? Okay, comment, trying to picture extreme user interviews. Yeah, Klieg likes are required to do that. Very funny.
Brenda, hi, this is Mark. In regards to the user or kind of like extreme interviewing, what we did in one focus group or in one kind of like when we asked the customer to narrate it out when they tried it out, we specifically threw scenarios at them where things were not working, where we frustrated them out. So for example, the Wi-Fi went down, or all of a sudden the internet became extremely slow. So things that they might not necessarily have in a perfect environment in, let's say, in a focus group, where everything is obviously perfect, everything is pre-planned, we actually threw the typical problem at them and looked at how they were becoming frustrated, what they were frustrated about, what they were doing when they were becoming frustrated. So it's kind of like to put also the negative side
sort
into
of like pressure testing, so to speak.
Correct.
Okay.
So we had like recently I did one focus group with a bank out here, and we were testing some of the interfaces and so on. And then they were kind of like going through the sign up process, keying all the data in, and then Wi-Fi went down. So they had to start over again, and then literally the mood changed completely over. So we were also getting, you know, some of the issue cases pretty much into the mix.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about segments and personas. So segmentation is a statistically derived method to create a set of definitions from which unique group subsets are identified. Normally, they cover value, not values, meaning value to the how much money you're making, right? Because there's the 80-20 rule of 80% of your money comes from 20% of your segments. Needs, what they need to do to accomplish their day-to-day tasks, and behaviors, which could be either emotional behavior or it could be channel usage, right? It's a trackable thing. Clickstream analysis often looks at behaviors as well. And it not only shapes CX, but it's really valuable for sales, marketing, and customer success so that you really can understand how to appeal in different ways to each segment. A segment is unique. One usually takes the database and at worst a statistically accurate sample. They enhance it and append demographic, psychographic, financial, anything you can get your hands on to get a 360 view of that individual. And then you do either a K-cluster or a conjoint analysis to drop them into unique groups. And generally there are 3 to 5 attributes that make that group unique anywhere in that array of 360 data. So that tends to be something that once you've done that, and you update it probably every 4 or 5 years, you can actually tag your database and do something with that segmentation. Now, having said that, that gets pretty geeky. You're not going to be explaining the statistical derivations to your sales or marketing. Marketing may want it, but generally, you know, the next step is how do I identify that segment so I can do something different, which is where personas come in. So they're a design tool using fictional characters to represent the users and their motivations. It tends to have rich narrative, describing attitudes, goals, behaviors, preferences, pet peeves. So probably a good portion of you all on this call have at least some kind of personas so that you could look at Molly Millennial, Samantha Senior, Robbie Rate stuff. There's lots of different ways of presenting this so that you can then describe to the people who are designing your tool, again, from a UX perspective, what is really going on. Okay, so what personas are? They're realistic visualizations of expected perceptions and behaviors used to highlight important human needs and behaviors while you're creating your systems and functions. They generally cover your value proposition, offers, channel strategy, copy, imaging, etc. What they're not is intended to replace or change true segmentation. They're not representative of every possible customer or user types. And Mark, you can chime in on this as well. What we find is most companies can handle roughly 6 to 8 segments, right? Even if they're using journey orchestration tools, the cost to create the copy, the imagery, the experience design for hundreds of personas is prohibitively expensive. So they take the value, which is where value comes in, and you understand who your best customers are and who your worst customers are. We call those below zeros, right? And you know how to deal with them immediately. And then you start picking off those in the middle that have different behaviors that you can either easily address. Some are more digital than others. Some might want to, in a bank, they might want to use an ATM as compared to a mobile app, right? So understanding the major ones or the most valuable ones are critical. And then generally, they pull from the segmentation to tag them for journey orchestration. If any of you work with Facebook or other social media, or if you work with Nielsen to do ad placement, having a persona is okay because they have lots of personas, but having the segment is far more effective in enabling your spend as well as the customer experience. Questions? Okay, personas can be mapped, right? So this is where it's very valuable to understand moments of truth, pain points of personas. this would be something that you would hand off to a team that would be solving problems. This is Kathy, who is trying to pay something by an IVR, and she's having the I love it, I hate it process as she goes through. The little green dots, I love it. The yellow dots, okay, it works. And the red dots, not so much, right? So you can actually score if you've got any kind of effort score or net promoter or satisfaction, and you can start collecting what the needs of this person are and if they're being met or not, and how you might pull this in. Great place to pull in voice of the customer and voice of the customer through the employee so that you can actually see what's going on and use a combination here of all of the techniques we've talked about. I'm not going to go through this. You can do it a little bit later on your own. But again, a persona or a segment can help you understand and articulate your value proposition, your messaging, your offers, your retention and support strategy, and your communications. And you're all saying, we're CX, we don't do that, that's someone else's job. But if you have customer insight, which is the key value proposition for any company, if you deeply understand your customers, you can impact their experience, which translates into all the channels that you're impacting, right? So you can become a valuable resource and team with all of the departments who may or may not be as deeply involved. And again, I often start all of my projects with a line across the top that says acquisition, retention, and growth. Because if you can tie everything that you do in CX back to that, you will never have to worry that your department's going to get downsized. So they also support execution. And this is a difference here. This is Valerie's view of the world of how CX, UX, and communications are all absolutely tied together. And understanding the moments of truth and the life cycle based triggers that are happening in a CX experience and the event triggers that are happening in a CX experience enables the people downstream to do something with that. Are any of you actually doing any partnering with your UX teams? And I saw Marianne is. Anybody doing that? And there's a comment, isn't it a good practice to attach personas and journeys? Hang on, I have to make this bigger to, why is that? Hang on, let me make it bigger. Yes, it is absolutely a good practice to attach personas to journeys. And you can do it a number of different ways. You could tag an overall map. So if you're just doing a sticky note approach, you could actually tag that particular persona for that touch. And it could be all personas go through it or some personas do it, right? Or you can study personas as a deeper level. So if you're doing a map and you do a inch deep and a mile wide, and you suddenly see areas that have lots of clusters of moments of truth and pain points, you can go in and see, is that impacting a particular group? Or is it impacting a particular channel that indeed impacts a group, right? So personas are really important. And again, how much money you're going to spend on them is also important.
Valerie,
questions? Yep, please.
Yeah, probably to build on top of that. So I believe that the persona is absolutely essential to journey mapping because everyone experiences your brand from the outside in completely different. Therefore, every persona is different. So when you do a journey mapping and you don't define the persona, you technically do only an inside out view where you say, this is what we want to do, but it's not how necessarily a certain person expects it. So the persona or the journey mapping requires three different components. One is the persona, who is actually experiencing it. The second one is the scenario, in which situation or scenario is this person expecting it, and the emotional state that this person is in when they perform that. So for example, if it's a complaint, the emotional state of this persona is completely different than if it's kind of like a happy situation signing up for a product situation. So when you have those three components defined, your journey mapping will be much more accurate of the emotional mapping that the journey map is supposed to show, like the green and red dots that Valerie was talking about.
You're hired.
Yeah, and then thank you. Take the job. And then the second thing, Valerie mentioned that the persona and segment are overlapping, but never 100% the same. What I usually have seen is when personas are being derived or segments are being done, it's kind of like a feed-off process from both sides. The persona will probably cover maybe 90%, 80 to 90% of the attributes that you cover in your segmentation, but never 100%, because then you would have a segment of one. So the persona is wide enough to cover the overlapping, let's say, sides or the fringes of your segmentation. So because there will always be customers that are not 100% matching your maybe demographic-driven segmentation, but rather cover let's say some of the psychographics that are kind of like influencing that there's a one-time situation where someone from the outside will actually use it. So the persona is more from the psychographic, what is it called? The ethnographic
Yep,
aspect.
ethnographic research. Yep.
Whereas the segmentation is obviously heavily focused based on the data you actually have inside your organization, because you derive it from the usage pattern that you actually have. So that's more the demographic and quantitative research in regards to usage patterns and so on.
Right,
So
but you can augment those if you go to someone like Axiom. I can go buy any of your guys' underwear size for 50 cents. I can buy every prescription you've ever had for $3. The mental what is it? The thought that there is privacy is totally spurious. There is no privacy. I can actually buy every permit that you've ever pulled on your house, every financial transaction you have had, and it is all out there in living color and legal, and totally legal to do it. So yeah.
And building on top, so because recently I had one session with a client where the client asked, so what do I start with the persona or with the segmentation? I said, you ultimately start with both, because you take whatever information you have, and then you take from your branding, who would you like to sell to, type of thing. So describe what the emotional context is, and then put them together. And then similar to like one of those seesaw playground things, you put something on the right side, then on left side, right side, left, right. And it ultimately builds up until it's fully integrated and really reflective and helping each other out. So this is not like marketing against the internal analytics guys. This is working together on finding out who's really buying your products.
Yep. Okay, so let's keep going here. This is a methodology for mapping. Right, so customer journey maps provide a consolidated view of your customer and your business operations, people, process, information, and technology. Done right, they include qualitative information, as Mark is talking about, all of the emotional, ethnographic. You can even, there's lots of arguments one has of when decision sciences meets experience mapping, but it has a definite input of decision sciences. It then takes what's happening below the scene, the service blueprint, right? So you could have a process diagram, a Visio one, or a service blueprint of what are the actions the company is taking. Generally, if you organize it by people, process, information, technology, culture, it's easier to analyze at the back end. So what are the things that are happening in the background as you map the system that's supporting the customer? And then finally, how much measurement data, quantitative information can you append here so that you can actually then do business cases of, does it pay for us to do something different? Because journey mapping is all about the fault line of what the customer is expecting and needing as compared to what the company is providing. And the fault line is really money, right? Does it impact me from a customer impact, a company impact? How feasible is it? And how much does it cost? Right? So those are, if done right, it really does give you a 360 view of insight and analytics. This is an example here of a number of different ways mapping can then also be applied So we use the term applied CX for here. Detailed journey views give you storytelling, and you can augment them with a lot of interesting information. I think, Mark, you talked about the visualizing different segments. Even the most simplistic map, you can compare two personas. This particular view, if you blow it up, is a Molly millennial versus Samantha senior buying insurance. One wants a digital experience. They go on to NerdWallet and they go on, they expect DocuSign. And the more traditional boomer or even older is expecting much more in-person experience, or at least on the phone. And you know, they're not necessarily going to respond to emails or forums that are in PDF, right? So when you see a lot of companies who want to do digital transformation, and you face them with what they have to do to attract a new segment that they may not have experience with, this is often a big wake-up call. We see it a lot, right? Doing competitor analysis, doing your marketing and communications, understanding process flows, and then employee and HR experience are all great ways to augment your knowledge and do more use cases for journey mapping. Questions, comments? Okay, service designs and blueprints. The very first thing that you should be doing when you start down the path to execution is choose the metrics that you want to have, right? We go through and see this, and I'm sure everybody who's on this call gets to the end of a project, maybe CX, it may be journey orchestration or marketing automation, it may be customer impact, and they get through and they spent a fortune on something like Medallia or Qualtrics. I see it a lot because voice of the customer is a big deal in CXPA. They get to the end and they find out that they had no idea how they were going to measure current state versus future state of all this voice of the customer stuff they were doing. And they have to rework it because their database doesn't have that data. Huge. Understanding what your executives need to know so they fund you, what you need to know so you can improve, and what other people need to know so that they collaborate is really important. I just can't emphasize that enough. So this is a really interesting framework. Again, it's a little quant, little qual, right? So this is the HEART framework from Google: happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success or effort, right? You have to make it an acronym. So I think this is a pretty interesting metric set because it does cover a lot of both. Classic service design follows a pretty clear approach: research, workshop, service blueprinting to start, understanding your service proposition development or your product proposition development, concept sketches, presentations, meaning that extreme user or role playing, experience prototyping, add water and repeat, testing, and then finally delivery. Prototype. So what is a prototype? It's an early sample, model, or release of a product built to test a concept or process to act as the thing to be replicated or learned from. It's used in a lot of different contexts: semantics, design, software programming. In services, it's often called a pilot. I'm a huge fan of pilots, and also of pilots that you have tested that you know will work, but you have in your back pocket, just in case you're challenged by someone to say, what are you doing and how is it helping us? And I know I sound somewhat defensive, but in these times of COVID, I'm getting a lot of phone calls saying, we've just had a merger, or we're doing some layoffs and I'm a little nervous. How can I prove my worth? So having something in your back pocket that you can say, this is how CX improved retention and growth in times of depression and acquisition in times of growth, is really important. And again, if you share that knowledge with the other teams that are responsible for that, that makes you a hero versus a competitor. Make sense? A lot of child psychology in this CX thing. So the sequences for 4 levels of experience prototyping are first discussion, then simulation, then piloting, and then participating. For retyping and designing a new product or service, research, analysis, ideation, prototyping, documentation. So remember the orders of things here. They'll become really important in just a few minutes. Okay, lots of different user testing research methodologies that go all the way from behavioral and quantitative to attitudinal and qualitative, right? We're not going to go over them, but again, there's tons of these. And interestingly enough, you know, as we go through this, a lot of people pretty much use a crutch of either JIRA or user testing for most things, and they kind of forget some of the other things that you can do. So, and again, that's a personality of a company. I have a little white paper that's wandering around approaches to mapping. And Forrester, interestingly enough, asked me this question when Tony Costas was there. And it was this huge aha, because again, I've been doing this for 30 years. They said, when do you decide what type of approach to use, whether you should do a deep dive or an inch deep and a mile wide or what? And I realized I had never thought of that. And it really comes down to the personality of your company. If you're in a highly regulated company who has lots of customer data, say a financial services company or a telecom, you actually tend to take an approach that's much more quantitative at the start and then realize you need to pull in emotion. You're all Six Sigma, everything. If you're CPG or a startup, a lot of people tend to be much more in the soft advertising persona world, and then they find that they run up against the wall of execution. So it's very interesting in looking at this, because in the end, to get the right experience design, you need that 360 approach, right? So this last slide here talks to the way that, you know, again, we see the world. And Mark, I think you're pretty in alignment with this as well. Julie, a few others that are on this call. We tend to look at voice of the customer through the employee, because they're an amazing aggregator. CX maturity. Looking at personas, because that allows you to magnify a particular group that's valuable to you and you can understand their differentiated needs and behaviors. Doing experience mapping, right? So journey mapping, experience mapping, really understanding what the person is going through as they go through their interactions with you as it compares to the rest of their life. That then informs customer experience, so fixing the big issues that might be people, process, information, and technology. It informs campaign or communication design. It informs UX. And then those optimized interactions get measured both by something like a quantitative view, as well as a feedback loop. Listening, constantly listening to your customers, supported by data. And so again, this is sort of the way that we see experience design through execution. And obviously user design, design thinking can be applied at virtually all of these pieces as compared to being a separate element. Questions, comments? Okay. And the last slide in this particular deck is what to look for to spot failures before they happen, right? So I'm a big proponent here of being prepared. So if you're seeing a lack of interest from either your customers or your internal folks, that is a red siren, right? You're not relevant. So you need to jump on that and make sure that you're relevant. Be aware of poor communication. You know, this is a constant issue, especially in siloed and big organizations, is that you need to do exactly what you do for your customers and do stakeholder communications in a way of making sure that they know what's in it for them, making sure you're not a threat, making sure the CX design is communicating just in time to them, just like you would with your customers. So strong centers of excellence always have a clear communications and change management program going for themselves as well as for the company. Being honest about lack of velocity. This is really important. I've done a number of projects where people approach developing a new product or moving into a new market. And, you know, when they're doing their pilot or they're going through even in looking at their competitors, understanding how much impact this particular piece is, or if it's losing velocity because of outside things. You know, a lot of people lost a lot of velocity when businesses slowed down this year, right? So do we put this on the shelf and return to it? Or do we press forward and risk a failure, right? Find out if you have no bad news environment. Right? This is really typical in larger organizations, especially the regulated ones, where people are tapped down all the time. They don't want to hear bad news. It often is an issue with middle management. So the field knows exactly what's right and what's wrong. You listen to their voice of the employee, they tell it to you, and then somehow between the report you put out around your contact center and what they're hearing, or your clickstream analysis and what you're seeing, and when it filters up to executives, suddenly it's all rosy and it's really not so much. We don't want to hear that. And, you know, complaints are gifts. Flaming social media things like I do all the time are a gift, because most people aren't going to take the time to do that. So if you've got a percentage of people that are presenting bad news about a product or your experience or whatever, you should listen to them. And then articulating scope changes. One of the things that is critical when you do a 2x2 of impact and feasibility is what you're not going to do. Because people tend to be really optimistic when they go through prioritization and they say, well, it's got high impact, everything's got high impact, high feasibility, and it's okay if it costs a lot. And making sure that your scope is clear, and if you do change what's happening and the impact of that down the stream is really important for your center of excellence. Any others that you see that you think of that you've fallen into when you're spotting failures before they happen?
Tenor of senior management might be one of the points. If
Oh,
you know
yeah.
that there are like upcoming changes due to retirement or end of contract, this is kind of like when all of a sudden new management comes in, they think everything what the predecessor did was bad, and therefore it switches over.
Yeah, and interesting that you say that. Again, I've been doing this for about 20 years before anyone knew there was CX. And first of all, the most important thing you can do is get senior management support. At least one of the financial senior managers, even better than the CEO. But turnover in CX organizations is huge. If you go to CX Insight Exchange, I talked to Bruce one, like two Insight exchanges ago, and I said, do you notice that there's still 4,000 people in CXPA and 1,000 people have come to this, and 40 to 50% of them are new? Where did those other people go? And so there is relatively high turnover in the industry and people, as well as when, as Mark suggests here, when there's turnover in the organization, it's very interesting to see that. And I'm noticing here, he said, when you see that senior leaders shut down feedback from their employees on either engagement themselves or in less formal ways, that is definitely a red flag that you need to make sure that what you're saying, doing, and acting on has a big what's in it for them component. Some reading, okay? So There was a really good Goodreads list here. If you look at this, which is different, that link above leads you to a different group of books on experience design. This book here, this set is really good. There's a lot of different ones. Again, they're very UX oriented, but that's okay. And then I just got, I don't know how many of you, I just got a Qualtrics listing of the top 20 books to read that are sort of like, you know, Oprah's book list, but they're customer focused. So if any of you, you can go, I'm sure you can Google it on Qualtrics, but I actually downloaded the PDF. So if any of you are interested in that, I will load it up in the library with the list of interesting books. Okay, on to the fun part. Not to be outdone by Mr. Mark, I too have now done a Kahoots for our, yay, I can learn new things. See, my brain, my synapses are not totally solidified. So go to your mobile phone and find kahoot.it again, and we'll start playing. Now, any of you don't want to do this can still do the ABCD part, right? Don't be intimidated.
Valerie?
Yeah, you got to go. Yeah.
No, I'm in Kahoot, where it says create Kahoot. Is that where we go once we're in it? Where do we?
No, you're going to be play a game.
You actually go to kahoot.it, not kahoot.com.
Yeah, I have the app on my phone, so.
Yeah, so you have Kahoot IT, and it should say play.
Okay.
Let me go. So it says play Kahoot, enter pin game here, or game pin. And it would look like Kahoot, game pin, enter. You seeing it?
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, key in our number here, 864-3803. Okay, we've got 7 of you. Okay, everybody's going to be in, is in. There's a couple of people need to be dropped. I went a little long on this one, I'm sorry. If you can hang in there, this is a good session. Otherwise, we will, you'll hear it on and I'll post it. So in the past, new services were usually designed by which of the following methods? Customer input, employee suggestions, trial and error, or profit expectations. And I've given you each 30 seconds to do this. I wonder why I went so much further over. Mark, you did that. Okay, the correct answer is trial and error. You see we got a little spread there. We're going to just kind of go through. Yeah, if so, whoever's driving, do not join Kahoot, please. We'd like you alive. Okay, which of the following is used as the new yardstick by which people and organizations and a judge for performance excellence? 1, experience intelligence. 2, emotional intelligence. 3, customer intelligence. Or 4, behavior intelligence. Who knew there were so many intelligences or intelligentsia? Okay, 6 answers. I gave you 30 seconds. I gave the other guys yesterday 20 seconds. It was too little. And we got the same spread we got last time. The correct answer is emotional intelligence, but customer intelligence, I would think, would be equal. But again, in CXPA land, emotional intelligence is the key. Okay, let's see how we're doing. Brenda, screaming ahead. Question number 3, which of the following experiences is essential in public services like healthcare, transportation, welfare, and energy? User experience, customer experience, provider experience, or human experience? Okay. Only 5 answers, 6 answers. Okay, the correct answer is 3. Sorry, human experience. 4. Aha, interesting. Everybody put customer. This happened yesterday as well. So this is an interesting question. If you look at healthcare, transportation, welfare, energy, these are all what I'd call CPG or mass experiences as compared to the more one-to-one ones like retail and banking. So they're taking a more holistic or human approach as compared to the ones that are a little more transactional. And there are 2 or 3 questions that are very similar to this in the 100 question set that target the particular industry. So look at those industries, and that's going to give you a clue to that. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Question number 4. All of the following statements are true except a design culture is nurturing, a design culture encourages failure because failure is considered learning. Designing and refining is an invitation to be open to fail and fail early. And designing and refining prevents the process of visiting and revisiting ideas. So this is a pretty tricky one with some word salad in it. Okay. The correct answer is designing and refining is an invitation to be open to fail and fail early. Like yesterday, almost everybody got this wrong, right? Because it's an invitation to be open to fail and fail early, right? Versus being open to failure as learning. And I think this is a very subtle difference. A lot of people were frustrated with it. So it's going to go over to Arlene when we end back to CX University, because I think it's not clear. Kind of marching along here because I know you've got time constraints. Which of the following requires the application of design thinking? Ooh, hang on. Innovation, experience, competition, or employee retainment? Okay, excellent. Most people got number 4, which is innovation. Again, other than employee retainment, I think the other 2 would also be pretty equivalent. Okay, Brenda, you're on fire. Which design tool is a useful way to bring typical customer life and communicate the value of the target group? Role-playing, drawing the experience, character profiles, or quick and dirty prototyping? Remember, these are the definitions that you're going to have to pretty much memorize. Okay, the correct answer is character profiles. Excellent. Role-playing would bring that to life, but in the exact sense of the term, it is character profiles. Okay. Number 7, which design tool is a valuable way to reveal design opportunities and show how a product might affect user behavior? Drawing the experience, shadowing, character profiles, or body storming? Okay. And the answer is, okay, shadowing. Interestingly enough, you all went for the bait of body storming. I think it would probably be any of these except for character profiles, but shadowing is the correct answer. So shadowing is different. It's watching as compared to body storming, which is sort of challenging with props. Okay. Which of the following is a reason to use draw the experience as a design tool? To quickly generate and test many context and behavior concepts. It's a useful way to reach users' motivations, concerns, and perceptions. Brings customers to life, communicates value of concept for various target groups, and a way to debunk assumptions to reveal how people conceive of experiences. Long sentences, sorry. So why would you draw the experience as a design tool in CXPA land? Okay, look at 3 of you got that right, and 1 bringing, yeah, I would say that it could be one of those 2, but this is the specific reason to do so. Any comments? We've lost a few of you again. I'm sorry it's gone so long. A couple more people had to drop off. Okay, which of the following is first step in persona building? Locating your customers, describing your customers, connecting with customers, or understanding customers' decision-making process? Okay. And the answer is describing your customers. Another spread here. Again, this is where it's really important to go back and look at the actual definitions because they're subtle differences. Brenda, you're in the lead from start to finish. 2 more questions after this. Companies building effective journeys master 4 key capabilities, including automation, except proactive personalization, cost reduction, contextual interaction, and journey innovation. Which one of these is not like the other? Okay, I think everybody's answered. And the answer is cost reduction. Look at that. Stars, we got 100%. Excellent. AP, you're on fire. Okay, casting a wide net for possible opportunities is an example of which step of a project journey? Synthesizing, generating ideas, refining, or implementing? This is one, I think I got all of the customer journey ones wrong, which is sad. Okay. And the answer is, yep. Every single one of, I did the same thing. Generating ideas was what I selected. The actual correct answer here is refining. So looking at the different opportunities. So another answer here that I selected because I got it wrong, but I think it should be generating ideas personally.
Yeah, casting a wide net is
Screams
like
generating ideas
of refining.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't make them up. I just took these absolutely right out of the deck. Which of the following is the most important regarding the design of measurements? Documentation, research, ideation, prototypes, analysis. Ideation, research, analysis, documentation, prototypes. Now think through this of what the logical stream is. Prototypes, ideation, documentation, ideation, research, or research, analysis, ideation, prototypes, and documentation. Okay, the final answer, you all got that right. Good for you. Okay, let's look at who won. Oh, one more, I'm sorry. Which of the following sequences correctly shows the 4 levels of experience prototyping? Discussion, simulation, participation, pilot. Discussion, participation, simulation, pilot. Participation, discussion, simulation, pilot, or discussion, simulation, pilot, participation. There were just a ton of these little word salad ones. So this, okay, a little bit of everything. The right answer is discussion, participation, simulation, and pilot. It could have been, I see where people would say discussion, simulation, pilot, participation. Pilots usually last. Now, if they had had an act and redo, it might be something different. Okay, so who's on the podium? Number 3, Hanks, yay. Number 2, Mark. And number 1, yay. Brenda, you win. Okay, so that's it for today. I'm going to share this information